There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to be going over applying to research opportunities, the nitty-gritty, and what we mean by that is just talking about some like hidden knowledge, basically, that like those that have been in academia for a long time kind of know, but it might not be like very obvious to everybody. And so we wanted to kind of bring that information up to light so that you guys are pretty aware of the academia, kind of like behind the scenes and like what to do and what not to do. Okay, so I'm gonna link in the chat a Zoom recording that we have on YouTube. And this is just how to get involved in research if you haven't learned about like the first step on just how to get involved in research and what to do if you can't find a position this year. Yeah, you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So that's the link that I put in the chat. So some objectives for today, we just wanted to share one, how to get involved within your research area, opportunities available here at UMich, exploring different types of RA positions, walking through the actual process of getting an RA position, and then what to do if you don't get one, / other helpful tips on what not to do to help boost your candidacy. Okay, and so this is us. We kind of want to talk a little bit about our PhD journey. Not every journey is linear. And I'm currently a fifth year. My name is Becca Gonzalez. I'm currently a fifth year in biopsychology. Then we'll also have Lindsay Hoover in our fourth year, who's a fourth year in clinical psychology. And then Tong So, who's our third-ish year on social psychology. So as you can see, we're from different areas at different stages in the program. And we'll kind of talk briefly about our journeys to get to the PhD program. Okay, so I can go ahead and start a little. My path was, I would say I got really lucky, and mine was pretty linear. How I got my first position in undergrad was actually just talking to my current postdoc who is teaching a class. She talked about her research and I talked to her and I was like, well, I'm really interested in what you're doing. And she said, okay, if there's any open positions, I'll email you. And then luckily there was an open position in like the next semester. And then I was able to join the lab. I got paired with an Eracta mentor, which is just basically somebody who is had just finished their PhD and is working on their postdoc. And she kind of mentored me on how to do different conferences, how to apply to different types of programs to help me get to graduate school. And then I applied for this IMSD program, which is specific to my school, but basically they focus on getting first generation students to PhD programs, underrepresented students. And so they helped a lot with funding. And so that's kind of how I was able to get a lot of my research experience. I didn't have to work 2 jobs. I could just work in my lab. And then I also did a summer research internship at the University of Colorado Boulder through one of the programs that we'll talk about. And then I applied to graduate school. Luckily, I went straight from undergrad to graduate school. And then now I'm here doing my PhD in biopsychology. But again, every path is different. And it's actually not that common to go right out of undergrad.
Yeah, so I guess I can go next. Hi, I'm Lindsay Hoover. And so my path did involve several gap years between graduating from undergrad and ending up in the PhD program. So I'm a first generation college student and originally attended undergrad in central Illinois in the miles and miles of cornfield that are below Chicago, Illinois. And so my undergrad college had about 600 students total. And so there were no research labs, no professors doing research, no other universities in the area to be able to really get research experience. So early on, my research experience looked like creating opportunities for myself or seeking out opportunities that I could take advantage of. So I did some independent undergraduate research with professors that were willing to supervise projects. I got some funding for a 6-week internship at the Mayo Clinic, which was the result of a cold email that I sent asking if they'd take a volunteer who has some money, and they said yes. And then moving on to an honors thesis, which they did have at our program, that I was able to create my own research experience. Coming out of undergrad, being a first gen student, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't really know where I wanted to end up. I did apply to PhD programs straight out of undergrad, but I didn't have the research experience or really know my research interests well enough at that point to be competitive. So I had one interview that wasn't successful out of 10 applications, and decided to get some work experience in the community for a while. So I worked for about a year as a community crisis screener, worked for a year on an inpatient unit working with patients that have mental health conditions, which is where I was able, through practical experience, to figure out that I really like clinical, but knew that I was more interested in a research path than I was in a purely practicing path. And so through that process, I applied again to clinical programs, got nothing in that application cycle. And so started looking for more volunteer research experiences through that process of figuring out that research was really important to being able to get accepted. And so after a while and a couple application cycles, I really wanted to dedicate myself to getting the research experience that I needed. So I moved here to Michigan for a couple years and worked full-time as a lab manager with Dr. Ashley Gearhart, which ended up being my research passion and a really great fit for me. And so I applied broadly for my third application cycle, but ultimately chose to stay in the lab that I had worked in for a couple of years, and am now a clinical science or clinical psychology PhD student as a fourth year working on food addiction. So about 4 gap years, I think, in there total, but a lot of attempts to get into school throughout the process. So keep trying. You can get there even if it takes a few attempts.
And hi, my name is Tong. I'm a 30-ish year because this is technically my fourth year in Ann Arbor, but because I took one semester of leave, so this is my second semester in my third year. I am somewhat in between comparison to the two routes you just heard about. I am fortunate enough that my undergrad institute is a research institute, so I did have a lot of opportunities just within just on campus. I did try between 2 labs at my undergrad and decided to stick closer to cross-cultural psychology, but my undergrad lab is taking more of a developmental cognitive approach versus the social program I am in right now. I did take 1 year of a gap year between my undergrad and my graduate school, partially because my first round of PhD application was not super successful, and also partially because I want to give myself a chance, like just want to know how life feels when you do more than 40 hours of research every week and do that 50 week out of 52 weeks every year. So I allowed myself to do a 1 year of lab manager position, which fortunately was paid. And after that, I applied again at the time, both knowing better what I want to do. So my application was more focused, and also knowing that I actually do enjoy doing research as a full-time job. And that's how I got involved in my current labs. One is focusing more on cultural psychology, or how socio-ecological, socio-cultural context shapes psychological tendencies in general. That's one side. The other side is more focusing on self-knowledge and decision making and judgment. So that's how I ended up where I am right now.
Great. So kind of like the point of us talking a little bit about our journey is just to kind of show that the end goal can be achieved through different routes, right? There's many different ways to get to graduate school. Some people take time off, some people don't, and get different experiences from it, and then also learn about what they like, what they don't like. So that's just kind of an idea of, how we got here. And so now we'll go a little bit more into about finding different research opportunities. So first, where is research performed, right? There are different types of institutions where research can be performed. When we're looking at academic institutions, such as, you know, UMich and like different colleges. One, looking at psychology, as you know, psychology is very broad, right? And there's like different interests that people have. So you can also find similar research that you would do in the psychology department in different disciplines, such as, you know, social work, sociology, public health, the medical school, things like that. And even in like cognition and computational science, especially with like a lot of AI, and computational neuroscience that's going on right now, just trying to understand different networks. So those are just some different ways that you can look into doing research that does relate to psychology, but might not be specifically in the psychology department. There are also other firms, government agencies, private companies that are also performing their own research. And then there's different types of research settings, right? So you can think of the traditional lab setting where they're doing either animal research in an actual laboratory, in a wet lab, or cognitive science where they're doing performing MRIs and things like that, or just a plain old office where they're doing maybe some qualitative data. But then there's other types of research in applied settings, right? So like people go into schools, community organizations, hospitals, prisons to really learn and collect data at these institutions to learn about what's going on and answer different questions about the institutions. Okay, so what types of positions are available, right? So, and I'm sure we've talked about it before, but credit-based, so there are different, you can do either independent study with the current lab that you're working for and get some credit, or you can, sometimes there's availability to do work study so that you can get of some funding for being in the lab and doing some research. Then some programs, especially summer programs, have either like a stipend or hourly pay where they either give you a whole stipend for working over the summer or based on hourly pay, how many hours you're actually working in the lab. Then there are internships, both paid and unpaid, different types of internships that you can look into. Yeah. And then lastly, which is probably the bulk of a lot of the positions available, are volunteer positions where you can go in and be able to work in the lab based on your availability and also the availability of the lab, and get some training in to be able to maybe eventually get to these like credit-based or work study positions. And specifically at U of M, looking at some of the opportunities available to undergrads, we have the Europe program, which is available in the fall and winter, and then also the independent study program, which is where you can work on your own project in the lab that you're currently doing research in and get credit for. But then there are also summer opportunities. So you can either do a summer research opportunity program here, or MSpice is another summer opportunity where they really get you into the lab and you can work on a project over the summer, but also you get classes and seminars to teach you more about the process of grad school, how to do presentations, learning how to communicate your science and things like that. And then most of the summer programs also come with a stipend to fund you over the summer as well. Now there's also, if you want to go outside of Michigan for the summer, there's definitely a lot of opportunities to do that. There's nationwide opportunities. Don, can you skip one more? There you go. And so one of them is the Big Ten Academic Alliance. And so that focuses, you send one application for some of the Big Ten schools, and they'll usually pay for you to come and fly to and stay at whatever school you end up doing research at. And then they usually also give you a summer stipend along with those seminars and pair you with a lab to be working in over the summer. And then there's also the NSF research experience for undergrads. And then there's one more, the APA website lists undergraduate research opportunities. And I'm gonna link in the chat. Yeah, you can go over one. You can skip one. Sorry. Can you move to the next slide, Tom? Okay, so we have a compiled Google Sheet with the summer research slash internship details, and we're gonna link it in the chat for you guys so that most of these are updated. Some of them, the dates might not be updated, but the website is still there, so you can just make sure that you're looking at the website for the specific date. And some have not released their deadline just yet. They usually start opening around December, and then they're usually due between like January and March. And this is usually for the summer research and internship deadlines. Great, and I'll pass it over to Lindsay.
All right, so now that we've covered where opportunities are within U of M and some of the introductions, we want to get into the steps within the process to seek out and try to find research opportunities. So we're going to start by talking more informal within U of M. That's often the easiest accessible opportunities. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the components of more formal or external applications in a little bit. And so there's a few steps that we want to go over today in the process of exploring those more internal positions. The first one is defining your interests or goals. So it's hard to find a position if we don't know what we're interested in or what our goals are long term, to make sure we're getting out of the experience what we're hoping for and valuable experience. The second one is to take all those interests and goals and narrow all of the options that are available at U of M down based on fit. What's going to really be a position that's going to help you move towards those goals or interests. The third one is expressing that interest. So seeking out those positions, letting people know that you're interested in the positions, and then finally applying to the positions that are available at the time. So if we go into those a little more specifically, that first goal of defining your interests or goals. As you saw through our introductions at the beginning, no two paths are alike, so there isn't a clear right or wrong. You may know right now or right out of undergrad exactly what you want to do and be really clear on the goals you're moving towards. You might be like me coming out of undergrad, where you could see yourself in a lot of different places, or you're not really sure. And so that's why it's great at this point to really be exploring what those interests are and thinking about what is your ultimate goal. So do you see yourself in a career where you're in grad school, that you're teaching? Do you see yourself doing research, people, animals, biological? And if you don't know the answers completely to those questions right now, research experience can be a great way to sift that out and test out what you think you're interested in. But you can also think, even if you haven't gotten experience yet, what topics are really interesting you in your coursework, the classes that really stick out. Is there volunteer work or experience that you're really interested in? What are the things you dislike that you know you don't want to have as a part of your future? So reflecting on these questions to figure out where are you headed along that path is going to really help you figure out what positions or what experiences are going to be most helpful. Once you start sifting around that current goal, you want to ask yourself, is it clear or is it unclear? And both of those stages at this point in undergrad are really normal and can lead to success. So there's not a right or wrong answer, but knowing where you're at in this interest or goal definition process will really let you know what your next step is moving forward and where you are in this process. And so asking yourself, are your goals clear or unclear? So unclear goals may look like, I want to develop more skills. I want exposure to research. I want to learn more broadly. Those are fantastic goals to have, but they don't really suggest what career we're working towards or what the steps are going to be that get you to an ultimate interest or goal. A more clear goal definition would look like, I have these 2 or 3 broad topics that I'm really interested in. I want to find labs that focus on those topics, those methodologies, or those areas that I'm interested in. Through that, I'm going to build skills that are really relevant to those interests that I have. Generally, it's going to help me connect with people who can write me letters of recommendation, and all of those things together are going to prepare me for a PhD program in developmental psych, which I plan to apply to at some point in the future. So you want to get really clear on those step-by-steps to know that you're in a good place to look for those labs that are going to give you exactly what you're hoping for. And so if you find yourself at this sort of unclear interest stage. You know you're interested in research, you want to learn, you want to gain more experience, but you don't have that specific sort of step-by-step plan. There are resources out there that can be really helpful for figuring out what kinds of work energizes you or what goals you want to move towards. So we'll drop this link in the chat, and I think I have it handy here. But this book is one great example of a resource that can help you figure this out. So Designing Your Life is a book about building a well-lived, joyful life, both within your professional life and more broadly, but it's got a lot of really great companion online worksheets, which is what the link in the chat is, that go over topics like designing your work life, energy engagement, good times, Odyssey planning. So there's all these different worksheets that can help you sift through and figure out the things that really motivate and interest you. And there are a lot of similar resources beyond this. So feel free to explore and spend some time on that interest exploration before feeling the pressure to jump into a lab too deeply. But once you do figure out, hey, these are the things I'm interested in, this is what I want to move towards, we want to do that narrowing process. So when you're trying to figure out what fit is going to be good for you for a research position, there's a few things to keep an eye out for. So the first one is lab details. Does this lab research things that you're interested in or have methodologies that you're interested in? Are the interests aligned? Who's the primary mentor or supervisor? What are your primary duties going to be? What does the commitment look like? Some labs have a strict 10-hour-a-week commitment to them. Some require evenings and weekends. Others have more free-form sort of commitments. So really having an idea of what is the lab that you're specifically applying to and what types of experiences are you going to get out? Will you be running participants? Will you be entering data? And does that align with the types of skills that you're going to want to be building in that lab? The second thing to think about is culture. So who makes up that lab? Are they former versus current undergraduates? Or are there a few undergraduates involved? Do they have journaling clubs? Do they foster skills? Do other undergrads, if you have friends in the lab, seem relatively happy and like it's a worthwhile commitment? Because different labs vary in how much personal connection there is with the PI of the lab, what kind of additional opportunities, and how much interaction you have with different lab members. So making sure it's an environment that you're going to feel comfortable and supported in while you're developing a new skill set is really important when you're thinking about getting the most out of that experience for yourself. And then finally, mentorship. So are there going to be opportunities to get mentored by senior RAs or graduate students? Are you going to have those opportunities to learn and to build the skills that you're seeking out, or are you going to more sort of be on your own in this position? So making sure any mentorship that you're looking for in that position is available to you. So once we've narrowed, we've got a small list of labs that fit our interests. We need to express interest, see if there's a position that's going to be available. And so the question often comes out, who is the person that I should contact? And a common mistake that can be made is making the assumption that the PI or the principal investigator, or the professor of the lab is always the person that should be emailed to express interest. And actually labs vary quite a bit, and oftentimes the faculty is sort of the broad person over a lab, but there may be lab managers, graduate students, postdocs, all with their own projects underneath that PI who all have their own team of RAs working on those projects. And so exploring lab websites can help you figure out who's the person to contact. Oftentimes that might be a lab manager, a postdoc, a graduate student, rather than a PI to be able to get on the list or to get an interview for that position. And so to orient you to what all of these different positions might look like, Dr. Jill Becker's lab is up here as an example to show that she's just one member of a much broader team. And within many of these labs, we have lab managers, which coordinate lab work. They're familiar with many of the projects. Graduate students may be involved on PI projects as well as their own projects. Postdocs are somebody who has their PhD but is getting additional research experience, additional training. So they're likely to have an advanced research skill set and be managing multiple of their own projects, but may have more time to mentor students than a PI while they're in that couple-year position looking for a longer-term position. And then there's that faculty or principal investigator that gets a lot of emails in their mailbox all day long, is probably the busiest person in the lab, is managing everybody else in that lab. And so if none of the other above are available or the lab website clearly says to contact the PI, you can absolutely do that. But keep in mind how busy they are, how many emails they're likely getting, and the benefits of being very clear and concise in that email if you are going to reach out to the PI to express interest. If you're asking, that's great, Lindsay, where do I find all of this information about these labs, though? There's a link at the bottom, which we can share as well. Let me see if, I don't know if either of you have that link more handy than I do, but actually, I think I grabbed it. I'll throw that in the chat. But this link will take you to lab websites and the department faculty or student pages where pretty much the majority, if not all of the labs within the psychology department at U of M here have a lab website and usually have a people or members of the lab page where you can see all of these different members of the lab and a small description. And those web pages often have descriptions of some of the ongoing projects, the research focus. So those lab websites are a great first place to look for a lot of this information on who do I express interest to and is this lab a good fit for me? And yes, thank you, Tong. Other universities or colleges often have very similar setups. So this is pretty common, pretty much the norm if you're looking for positions outside of U of M as well. All right, so then what do we say when we're expressing interest? And we have a few tips that we want to give you and a few examples of what we're talking about. So the most important thing in these messages is to be as concise as possible. Again, PIs are very busy. Lab managers, postdocs, graduate students are often getting a lot of emails as well. So keep those emails really brief, really short, no more than 4 or 5 sentences expressing your interest and leaning towards a more formal sort of writing style. Express knowledge in their work. So show that you have an understanding of what research is being done there. You can get this knowledge by checking the lab's recent publications, looking at their lab websites. Often there's also a page of recent publications on there. And doing a little bit of that background to, in 1 or 2 brief sentences, demonstrate that you understand what the lab does. Being really clear and direct, avoiding vague statements, being very clear that your intention of sending that email is to express interest in the specific position that you're hoping for, whether that be a volunteer position or a posted position with the lab. And then again, tending towards formality. So if they have a doctorate, doctor is usually the appropriate title. If they have a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, anything else, Mr., Ms., are usually appropriate and better to err towards using those. And then avoiding slang, jargon, casual language within those messages. So a couple examples of this. This first one is a beautiful example of a great way to write this email. It might look like, hello, Dr. Block. I'm a sophomore majoring in psychology with a minor in biological sciences. I read about your ACT lab and I think the social desirability experiment on your website is very interesting. Are you currently accepting RAs? Please let me know the process involved with getting information or in getting involved in your lab. I've attached my resume for your convenience. Thank you in your name. And I highly recommend that component of attaching your resume or a CV if you have a CV, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But that provides the opportunity to look up more information if they're interested in exploring your background more without having to type it all into the message of the email that may or may not be read. Encounter emails that we unfortunately often see but don't hit quite the same or have the same impact are like the example on the right. To say, hi Sam, I've heard it's good to get involved in research for anyone who might want to go to medical school. I'm a sophomore and I found your lab information through the psychology website. Can you tell me your research about your research. Do you think it's a worthwhile lab for undergraduates? So you can see in there, there's some typos. We're addressing the PI by their first name or the person that's being contacted. Asking questions about the worthwhileness. And so the first email gives off a much more professional, clear, and direct impression compared to the second one. And Tong makes a great point in the chat as well that it's a little bit different when we're talking about a lab manager or a graduate student. Sometimes addressing them by their first names is okay. Most of us go by our first names pretty regularly. But especially at the doctoral level. And if you have any doubts, erring on the side of the formality is usually a good bet. And so I mentioned a resume or a CV, and oftentimes these are confusing. Resumes are usually less than 2 pages. In comparison, a CV can be as many pages as you have the content to fill. They often don't have the same restrictions on them. It's important to note that both a resume or a CV, especially at the undergraduate stage, is okay. So don't feel like if you have a resume that you have to go draft a CV right now. But oftentimes by the time you get to graduate school applications or later into an academic career, a CV is expected. So it's never a bad idea to start crafting your CV, never too early to start shifting to that format. But the important thing is to convey the skills and the experiences that you've had. So if you do that through a resume, that might look like objectives, education, skills and core competencies, professional work experiment, and bullet points of essential duties and recognitions and rewards. In comparison, CVs often lead with education. So where you got your degree or where you're pursuing your degree, research and work descriptions with brief positions with brief descriptions. So there's often a little bit more describing than the simple bullet points in a CV. And in addition to awards, memberships, you might put peer-reviewed publications, conference presentations, other research experiences, departmental services. So it's a more comprehensive look with that lens of prioritizing the research, the academia, compared to a work resume. So both of these are totally okay. But important to have at least one of them because it's becoming more and more common for those to be a requirement of more formal applications, especially. All right. So then a few application or resume tips to definitely do. Use clear and simple language. So if you don't think your friends or your parents or somebody close to you would understand it, probably best to streamline it in a way that you might say to them in a clear, formal way. Tailoring details of experience to the job posting. So oftentimes, if you're able to carbon copy without making any changes your application from one position to another, that's usually a pretty good indication that it's not specific enough. So using specific examples like I worked on 2 projects with 7 students on topics XYZ, especially if those interests align with the interests of the lab that you're going to be applying to. But the more detailed and specific you can be, really highlighting the things that are going to be a strength for that position, the stronger your applications are going to be. And then aligning with what the lab's currently doing. So highlighting skills that might make you an especially good fit for that position, and being clear on that skill component that you can get skills from a lot of different positions. So even if you don't have research experience, you may have volunteers positions, course positions, work positions that you've built a lot of skills that you could still highlight that are a strength. Remembering that publications don't necessarily mean current work within a lab. So it often takes several months, if not several years, for us to get from initial data collection, cleaning, writing, and moving the paper out into the world. And so things that you're seeing on the publication page are often at least a couple of years in the past for the projects that were happening. So looking through that website to really find information on current research interests and projects. Looking at the lab pages, reviewing for positions, looking up the investigators. So really doing your research ahead of time and making sure that these labs are a good fit for you and that you know what position you're applying to. And then especially in cold emails, including the CV or resume, so that there's more information there if you're an applicant that they want to look at a little bit more closely. And then on the other side of that is application or resume tips that we don't recommend doing, which is don't submit materials or send emails without proofreading. So seeing typos, wrong names, lower cases, missing punctuation, um, are often signs of less attention to detail, which is often one of the criteria that we're looking for in researchers handling really sensitive, really important data. So making sure that you're demonstrating your high attention to detail with proofreading of your materials. Not bombarding people with too many emails. Again, everybody's incredibly busy. And so giving that grace amount of time that it may take a while to receive a response. Again, not being vague. So saying, I want to do research, I love working with humans, I love psychology, often aren't specific enough to indicate why that lab at that point is a really good fit. So going back to that, clear goals and intentions and topics that interest you. Don't propose learning what the lab isn't doing or that it's beyond qualification. So not entirely sure what that point means, actually, what the lab isn't doing. But that is beyond qualification. So not giving the suggestion that you are not qualified for the position, but really leaning into your interests in the things that do qualify you for the position and how you're writing those messages. And then if the position requires a cover letter, there can be a tendency to putting a lot of personal details into these, like true experiences with mental health conditions that are really important and very common, but often treads that line of professionalism. So it's better to err towards leaving out some of those personal details if you have any questions or pause about including them. All right, so I think that's
Sorry, just want to cut
yeah.
in real quick about what May looks like for proposing something beyond the lab is doing. So for instance, my lab uses EEG. And if someone emails us and say, I want to see how you can combine EEG with fMRI, that may not be a best signal for us because it's requesting or almost requiring us to completely go beyond our comfort zone for a very expensive technique. And that can happen if, faculty members are collaborating who can pull the resources together, but usually that doesn't happen often when it's an undergrad or even a graduate it's joining the lab.
Thank you, Tom. All right. So then next we're going to move into the more the different components of more formal or external opportunity applications. So there are 5 main components that we want to make sure that you're aware of that are pretty standard to the majority of applications. So those are demographic questions, transcripts, statement of interest, letter of reference, and interviews. And so the first component, demographics, mostly we want you to be aware that programs may be seeking applicants with specific characteristics. So as a part of that application, you may be asked if you're a US citizen versus an international student, whether you're underrepresented in the field. RFM stands for Rackham Merit Fellowship. So whether you meet Rackham Merit Fellowship criteria, such as coming from an educational, cultural, or geographic background that's underrepresented in graduate studies in the United States. Whether you're a transfer student, freshman, sophomore, what year you're going to be in, and your interest in graduate school. So being aware that these are things that you'll likely be asked about and that some programs may be seeking specific characteristics based on these questions. The next component is you'll likely be asked for a transcript. So for University of Michigan students, both official and unofficial electronic transcripts are available through Wolverine Access. So you can log into there and request a transcript or download your unofficial if you don't need an official version. And the reason that you're often asked for these are to check that you're in good academic standing, make sure that you're making good progress towards your degree, that you've taken relevant courses. So seeing that you have courses in psychology, courses from the med school, things that are going to be relevant to your interests. And then there are times where some programs have a minimum expectation of GPA, like a 3.0 or some sort of benchmark or cutoff for being considered for the position. The next component, and thank you, Tong put that link in the chat for the Rackham Merit Fellowship if you'd like to look at that a little bit more. The third component is statement of interest. So statements of interest are essentially small essays that you may be asked to write. And so a few tips while you're writing these are to not be too vague. Again, saying that you love psychology, that you would be happy in any lab. Even while we're exploring our interests, while that may be true, that we really want the experience, tailoring each application to say why that particular lab's research interests are going to be a fit for you is going to give you a much stronger application. Do mention relevant qualifications. So if you have technical skills, communication skills, if you're well organized, provide examples of how you demonstrate those skills and include those in your application. Don't feel the need to be overly altruistic. So statements like, I'm destined to help people, I'm going to change the world, I want to make an impact on others, are similar in that vague, like those are wonderful. And we really want to hear the reasons that this lab is going to be a good fit or this position is going to be a good fit in those applications. Do demonstrate written communication skills, detail orientedness by proofreading your statements. Avoid providing excuses or gaps or lacks of qualifications. So things like, I don't have much experience because XYZ. Focus on the qualifications and experience that you do have. And it'll be an assumption that part of this is that you're trying to gain additional experience. And then do contextualize resource limitations, such as coming from a disadvantaged background, that you weren't familiar with certain things, and then the components of what you did to learn to pursue that, to overcome any obstacles, can be a better way to reframe some of that information. The next component is letters of reference. So you'll often be asked to either have references listed or more likely to provide letters of reference. Things to remember about letters of recommendation or reference are that they shouldn't be people related to you. So moms, dads, aunts, uncles, grandpas, anybody like that, close friends typically aren't appropriate for letters of reference. Letters should demonstrate social skills, maturity, motivation, ability to work independently. So somebody who's able to speak to the skill set that you have and your professionalism in a position. These people can be former instructors of courses that you've taken. They can be supervisors from work positions. They can be from former labs. When you're applying for initial research positions, that varies a little bit differently in who is acceptable. Once you get to graduate application levels, typically your GSIs or graduate students aren't strong recommendation letters. Sometimes those are more appropriate during initial research position applications, though. So keeping in mind that those might be additional resources. And keeping in mind your readers trying to gauge how you work rather than how you are in class. So they're trying to get a sense of how you interact with others or how you function in a work environment and what skills you would bring. And then the last component is interviews. So interviews do come up. Oftentimes, labs or positions want to meet the person face to face and have a conversation. So big tips for interviews is the most important is practice. Get a set of questions, make a resume, sit down with family, friends, mentors that you have, and do practice sessions. That's the best way to build comfort with being able to answer these questions in the moment. Come prepared with questions of your own for the lab. So asking your own questions, usually there's an opportunity at the end where the person says, do you have any questions? And having questions prepared shows that you've done your research, you have an interest in the lab, and you're really wanting to learn more. So coming prepared with several questions, especially if you have multiple interviews with multiple people. Do connect any weaknesses or gaps to how you plan to address that issue. So another great way to reframe any weaknesses in your application can be to say things like, I haven't had the chance to interact with humans. That's why this lab is a really great fit for me, because I'm seeking out that opportunity to get hands-on experience with human participants. So you can, and that this position would be how you would address that. So you can find ways to tie it into your plan in the long term. And then do follow up with short thank you emails. So it shows huge professionalism to send a gratitude message thanking them, just a couple quick sentences. I often schedule these right after an interview to go out the next day so that I don't have to remember to do it the following day. But sending it within a day or two of the interview is usually pretty standard and appreciated. And with that, I think we're through the process. So I will turn it over to Tong to wrap us up.
Thank you. So just want to spend the last 20 to 30 minutes discussing so both Lindsay and Yvette have provided, really good resources and tips for people to get involved in research to secure those resources. But the fact is that there are always fewer positions than applicants. So what if I don't get what I want this year, and what are some potential additional resources that can help you boost your chances as a candidate or as an applicant. And I first just want to still acknowledge the fact that I think, or to my knowledge, COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 on training or on research has been much reduced in the past few months / a year. But if you are working with a very specific population or in a very strictly medical or clinical setting, there may still be implications. There may still be limitations in what research can be done and what opportunities are available. But the good thing is that research community as a whole has been pretty adaptive to online / virtual / long distance working environment. And that has become that has still been quite normative and available, especially for applicants who do not have great resources immediately in their neighborhood or in their community. A lot of these labs or these institutes are still open to working with people through online or through virtual platforms. And also research does involve multiple stages or multiple components. Not all of them require in-person or face-to-face interaction. So data cleaning, analysis, literature review, manuscript writing, and sometimes even brainstorming meetings can all take place without in-person circumstances or in-person conditions. And like I said at the very beginning, the fact that there are always more applicants than there are positions just mean that a good proportion of applications or a good proportion of applicants do not end up getting what they want. Here are just a few reasons why you did not get, and I do want to emphasize that not all of them are under your control. So do not take it too personally, and do not feel like, okay, that just means that I'm not good for research or I'm not good enough for research. So just want to dissect that a little bit. First thing first, I think both Lindsay and Yvette have emphasized it, and I want to re-emphasize this, that it's research is about matching, about good fit. So showing your dedication, showing your enthusiasm for a specific areas of research sometimes is more important than having like a great transcript or one specific skill. So you do want to customize your cold email and your application in a way to show that match, to show that dedication. But on the other hand, especially for more junior scholars, such as undergraduate students, you do not want to be too specific or too narrow about what you are willing or interested in doing. And with the rise of ChatGPT, it may be very attractive to rely on that external resource, and especially for first language, especially for non-first language speaker like myself. So ChatGPT can be a really good tool for either helping you develop your first draft or help you proofread at the very end, but you still need human input in this process. So do not completely rely on either ChatGPT or any external resources as you go through these applications. And finally, it's hit or miss. I discussed this with my advisor in terms of like how involved you are in extracurricular activities and how much you want to communicate that in your application. On one hand, usually research labs or research team do not want applicants who are like, I just want get straight A's in my transcript, and I'm doing research just to get another A, 3 hours credits of 4.0 in my transcript. So we do want to see some extracurricular involvement, but on the other hand, we do also want to see that you have the bandwidth for doing research. So I think it's a balance between showing that you have plans, you have interest, you have ambition outside of coursework, but also on the other hand, you have the time and flexibility for doing research. And the next general bullet point, like I talked about at the beginning of this page, is that not all factors are within your control, and sometimes not all factors are even within the PI, the faculty PI's control. For instance, the lab is at capacity. They already have 6 graduate students. Each graduate student is mentoring 4 undergrad, then maybe they just don't have the opening this year. Or if you are looking for summer internship, there may be limited funding for the lab themselves in terms of hiring paid RA over the summer. And sometimes, you know, those like kind of like random external factors can also work in your favor if the lab happens to be looking for a bilingual RA and you happen to be bilingual. That can be, you know, like good things for you, but again, that can be somewhat out of your control. The last thing that I do want to just briefly talk about is you do not want to burn bridges. So sending out that thank you email and being professional throughout your application process can serve you more good than you are aware of. Or put it in a different way is that sometimes like one red flag for the lack of professionalism can really burn your bridge or you know, remove you from the short list. You know, especially if you have already have some research experience or work experience, but you decide to move to the next position, that happens, and that can happen for various reasons. Even if you move, or even if you decide to move for, you know, personal reasons, or like things just didn't work between you and the previous position, you don't need to talk about that at your interview for the next position. You don't need to be specific about that. People understand things happen. Culture may not match between you and the lab. Interest may change. All of those are perfectly solid reasons or sound reasons. You just don't need to be too specific about them. And definitely don't badmouth about your previous employer or supervisor at your next interview. And one very common strength or expectation or recommendation a lot of research positions to have is that they want you to come in with research experience, and sometimes that can be a cycle. That is, people who have the experience will have better chances, and people who do not have that have a harder time to kick off. But not everyone have, especially like if your institute does not have a very a vibrant research a community or a lot of resources, there are still things you can do to set up yourself as an experienced applicant. So first thing first is, well, you can revisit our workshop on October the 25th, where we talked about how to get involved in research. But outside of that, there are things that you can do on your own or train yourself without having to work in a lab or in a traditional research environment. So first thing, if you are, well, these are I think, well, all of them are like online or on website based citation management application or software. And trust me, once you start doing research, doesn't matter if it's psychology or not, there will be a point when you have to write things down or manage these references, and showing that you have experience with any of them or all of them can actually be a really good strength when you're applying for research positions. Data management or basic coding resources. You don't have to be a wizard. You don't have to be a coding wizard, but especially if you're doing any kind of quantitative work or thinking about doing any kind of quantitative work, showing that you have experience in any of these coding, programming languages can be a huge strength. And here are just some resources that I think the slides will be posted after the workshop, so you don't need to worry about taking notes right now. But these are free online open resources that you can access even without any experience in the lab. And finally, if you are a U of M student, I do want to do a shout out for the Cisco team. They are really good consultants for data science and statistics. And they also have workshops from time to time that are free to at least U of M students. And you can look if you have similar resources at your own institution. Some resources or some similar resources may be under libraries for some institutes. And a few more things, if you want to, take the journey or the adventure for statistics on your own, there are also resources online. We list YouTube and LinkedIn Learning here, but there are also other opportunities out there. Not all of them are strictly free, but all of them should have at least a free trial that you can take advantage of. And finally, I'm surprised that no, I'm a little bit surprised, or like I'm usually extra impressed by applicants who come to the interview and say that I know about IRB. I or my lab works with the human participants, so knowing the research ethics, the limitation for working with different population, and showing the knowledge at interview or in your code email or in your CV can actually really stand out. That means I don't need to, but I mean, the graduate students or the lab manager don't need to train you from the very beginning. You already know, some big red flags in doing research. Usually these kind of training are available online through your institute, and it should be free. Takes about a few hours, and you do get an actual certificate after you complete that. So if you want to explore that before you even do application, and you have already get that certificate by the time you apply or by the time you send out that email, do mention that or include that in your resume or CV. And finally, especially if you move to or after you move to the interview stage, but for whatever reason they cannot grant you a position this year, that means usually you are on their short list. So you can inquire if you can join the lab unofficially. That can be, journal clubs led by the lab manager or the grad students, or RA lab meetings. All of these not all of these are open to everyone, but since you're already on their short list, and you can ask. The worst case scenario, ask politely. The worst case scenario is that they tell you, sorry, these are strictly for the lab members. You don't lose anything. And lastly, if you feel comfortable, and especially you have already got the interview, that means you're on their short list, you can politely inquire if there are any like things you can do to improve your chance if you want to apply again in the future. That could be ask them to recommend you a course or a training session or any specific skill that they think will really help applicants to stand out. So all of these, you can do that if you feel comfortable. And my personal experience is that especially for graduate students and for lab managers who are working with undergrad students is part of their work. Usually they're quite generous in terms of sharing these informal tips. And I do want to highlight, especially if you're here at U of M, that the department usually helps undergrad to get involved in research. I think they have moved I think we have retired the research opportunity database, but now all labs can just send an email to the department and say, can you include this recruitment ad to the departmental newsletter for next month or for next week's. So I think if you are a psych major or BCN major here at U of M, you are automatically subscribed to that newsletter, and every now and then do read that. It may include information that actually interests you or opportunities that actually interest you. And also, there will be from time to time departmental or area events that are designed to involve undergrad in research. So for instance, if you were at East Hall this Tuesday, you might have seen the research and service learning fair. And that's basically for lab to showcase their work and to communicate with undergrad that we are interested in hiring people. And there could also be brown bag or colloquium or talk series that you want to go to. Usually they're open to the public. Not the talk itself may sometimes feel a little bit too advanced for undergrad, but for people without a lot of research experience. But the event themselves are open to public. So do explore those opportunities if they're available at your institute. And finally, we are living in 2023, so we don't call them Twitter anymore, we call them X. But there are overall research opportunities available on social media as well. There is the existence of academic X or academic Twitter. It's not uncommon for either a lab as a whole or the PI to manage by PI, sorry, principal investigator, usually that's a faculty member of the lab, to manage a Twitter or an X account for the lab where they share the work of their lab, the ongoing projects, sometimes even the posting or the recruitment ad. You do want to, so these are pretty low stake opportunities on the net, on internet. That is, you can follow them or you can just keep an eye on them, but you still need to be professional, even when you are exploring opportunities online. And let's see. Oh yeah, here is just a screenshot of all different opportunities, postings, all the way from undergrad position all the way to postdoc, sometimes even to faculty position on the internet. We are at about 5:10. So I'm just going to quickly go through FAQ, and then I want to open the floor completely for question or comments. So first thing first, especially for undergrad, especially for more junior undergrad, if you feel like I'm interested in research, but I don't have a very specific topic, that is very common and very normal. You can think about, like your coursework or your extracurricular experiences, or even just like daily life. Think about things that interest you. Think about things that grab your attention for more than a few minutes. Think about things that keep revisiting you. That may suggest what you wanna research more formally, and also look through the listing or the lab websites or posted on the institute or the community or on the university website. That also give you some good places to start. And can I do research outside of my lab or department? So outside of my department or institute? That's definitely a yes, and sometimes I think even encouraged in the time of interdisciplinary research. If you're doing research for credits, though, do check if there are departmental regulations. Most of the time, the faculty members can be really accommodating, and a lot of faculty members actually have joint appointment across multiple departments. But you just need to be clear in terms of, okay, if I want my research credits to go to contribute to my major requirement or to my college requirement, you just need to first do your own homework and understand how those policies can be applied, communicate that need or communicate that preference to the lab, to the PI early on, so that they can help you achieve the goals you need. What is a good time to start my research experience? There's no too late, though. Getting started early is usually a good sign, or a good sign for the lab or for the employer, but also a good timing for the applicant, so that they have more time to explore their interest. They can do trial and error. It's possible to continue research after graduation. I think at least two of us talk about doing either a paid position or volunteer experience after undergrad. And more often, it's your passion, it's your commitment, it's your match with the lab or with the area that matters more in terms of the specific timeline or your transcript, or one specific skill. And all of us here today, three of us are our PhD in academia, and we are doing research more so within the academia community. But it's also perfectly common and perfectly common to do research outside of academia. And a lot of firm or private institute, they do also have a research department. So the skills you get from doing research can be perfectly transferable beyond academia. But you just need to be a little bit more careful about phrasing your skills in your resume. Don't get too academic, or don't get too don't use lingual. Don't use very area specific lingual when you're communicating your experience outside of the specific area that you work with. And again, just a reminder that no two paths are alike. There are usually multiple options, and if something were easy, everyone would do it. So explore your own path, it may take some trial and error, but you will get what you want. I think that's the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go put us back on the comments and the questions page. And I think I'm going to stop sharing so that we can completely open the floor for questions. Yeah, feel free to let us know if you have any questions. You can do that in chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Looks like Nicholas has a question.
Hi. Yeah, I was just curious. I'm not totally sure like what I want to do for my career, but I'm currently I'm on like the pre-med track. But I'm also really interested in psychology. So I think, research is something I would be interested in. But so do you know like how like I don't know. Do you know how like those two things will intersect, or like if this is something that would like be helpful to get involved in for that like career goal?
I work in a psych lab, but I have had pre-med undergrad in my lab as a research assistant, and I also did end up writing co-writing a recommendation letter for them. So that can intersect. I want to discuss two things. First, there are labs, or there are teams within psych department that do work that have more overlap with medical school or medical research than other psych labs. So first thing first, I think is that you can explore within the department and see if there are labs that do closer to medical application. That may be easier for you to find that overlap. And the second thing is the communication between you and the lab or your mentor in the lab can continue after you join the lab. After one semester of doing the research, they doing the research they assign you, or you are involved in, you can discuss with them, is there something that you think can help you long term, or are there additional stuff that you want to explore within the lab, or sometimes even outside of the lab? The mentorship doesn't end after you get in, or like the mentorship just starts after you get into the lab, and that can be a continuing conversation between you and the grad student, or you and the lab manager, or sometimes even you with the faculty member directly. Yeah, and again, if you just because you start working in the lab doesn't mean that you have to stay with them for the rest of your undergrad.
Thank you.
Other questions or reactions to the content?
Oh yeah, just want to piggyback on what Yvette already posted in the chat about doing research or starting research in senior. Yes, there are some short-term projects that seniors can easily hop on. Another thing is that if you're willing to consider is to communicate with the lab that you are willing to continue working on the project after you graduate. So that can be either a more formal paid lab manager position or research assistant position, or a more informal like continuing collaboration after you graduate. Or after you leave the institute. The bottom line is to show that you are willing to, or you are both willing and able to commit to the research that they are doing. Could you, sorry, Viviana, could you elaborate a little bit more by for like opportunities that you are looking for? You can either post in the chat or.
Yes, like for example, I'm thinking of if there would be like any opportunities for me to start getting involved in a lab, maybe like next semester or during the summer. I'm applying to the PhD program, combined education and psychology. So I'm really interested in starting to get involved in a lab.
Are you, so did you already, so like, are you already like in the application cycle for this year, or are you considering applying for a later time?
No, I'm completing my application now that it's due December 1st.
I would probably second what I've put in the chat, that sort of post-graduation, it becomes a little bit more difficult, a little bit less embedded in your environment to have all of these labs all over the place, but that there's certainly still opportunities out there. Definitely volunteer opportunities. Never underestimate the power of a cold email. The amount of opportunities that have come from a really brief professional cold email to labs of interest make a big impact, but also looking at the job boards for universities and looking for lab manager positions, research assistant positions, project or study managers or coordinators are often what the positions are called as well, can be great ways. And those positions have the added bonus of pay and health insurance. So, can't beat that.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of academic, what is it called? Academic / professional society have either a mailing list or a forum where they post these kind of hiring ads that's not specific to research assistants or lab managers. So a lot of time you will see a postdoc or faculty posting, but there will be some opportunities for more junior scholars there as well. So I think like SPSP, APS, APA, I think at least the three of them have a similar forum like this. You can start by Googling and see if you can just add yourself to the mailing list, or just go back and check the forum every few weeks.
Thank you so much.
It looks like we're down to our last few people here. So any more